Please, somebody help me. The voice cracked the way things crack when they have been holding too long under too much weight. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of sound that travels low across pavement and finds you before you have decided whether you were listening. Cade Merritt heard it at 4:31 on a Monday afternoon in Kingman, Arizona, where the heat in late summer sits on your shoulders like something that has decided to stay. He was cutting behind the old Texaco station on the shortcut that shaves 6 minutes off the walk home. 40 minutes door to door on a good day. He knew every crack in that route, every yard with a dog, every stretch where the mesquite trees leaned over the fencing and gave you 30 seconds of shade that felt like mercy. He had a tire iron in his right hand. He had used it that morning to pry a stubborn rim and dropped it into his bag without thinking. 10 hours on his feet will do that to a person. 10 hours of grease and engine oil and scraped knuckles, and the silence that settles over a small shop when the work is honest, but the money is thin. He was 18 years old, and he carried himself the way certain young men do when they have been the heaviest thing in the room for long enough that they have stopped noticing the weight. He came around the cinder block wall and stopped. There were four of them, late teens, maybe early 20s, the kind of loose and easy stance that belongs to people who have learned that their numbers are usually enough. Two had their phones out recording. One had his boot pressed against the front wheel of a parked motorcycle, rocking it with the slow, deliberate motion of someone deciding whether to tip it. The fourth was crouched in front of an older man who had been knocked to the ground and was trying to push himself back up. The man on the ground was maybe 60, heavy-set, gray-bearded, wearing a black leather vest covered in patches worn soft at the edges. His lip was split. His right palm was bleeding where the pavement had taken skin. He was looking up at the one crouching over him with the expression of a man who has known pain before and is not afraid of it, but who understands the arithmetic of 4 against 1 and knows what it adds up to. Please, the man said again, not begging, more like he was offering them one last door out of the room they were building around themselves. Just let me stand up. The one crouching laughed and flicked 2 fingers against the man's cheek, the way you would flick something small and unimportant. Nah, he said, you look better down there. Cade looked left. There was a woman with grocery bags who had stopped on the sidewalk 20 feet away. A teenage boy on a bicycle who had braked and was watching from the edge of the parking lot. A man standing in the open doorway of a laundromat with his hands in his pockets and an expression that had gone somewhere neutral and decided to stay there. A woman leaning out of a second-floor window above the insurance office, one hand on the sill watching. Not one of them moved. Cade felt something happen in his chest. Not fear exactly. He had felt fear before, and it had a sharp contracting quality that lived behind the sternum and wanted you to go small and stay small. This was different. This was more like a door swinging open, like something that had already made its decision and was simply waiting for his body to catch up. He thought about his mother. That was the thing that almost stopped him. Not the 4 of them, not the phone's recording, not the math of what could go wrong. It was one single image that moved through him in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Donna Merritt sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for him to come home, and the phone ringing instead. That was the only thing that gave him pause. That was what 2 seconds felt like from the inside. He moved forward anyway. Hey, his own voice surprised him. Steady, louder than he had meant it to be. The kind of voice that does not ask permission to be heard. All 4 of them looked up. Back up, Cade said. He kept walking. All of you. Right now. For 1 full second, nobody moved. The kind of second that feels architectural, like a room holding its shape while something decides whether to push through the walls. The one with his boot on the motorcycle wheel straightened slowly. The 2 with their phones looked at each other. The crouching one stood. The largest of the 4 stepped toward Cade. He had the build of someone who had spent years learning that his size ended most conversations before they started, and the expression of someone who expected this one to end the same way. Cade did not wait for him to arrive. He moved hard to the left faster than the larger man was tracking and brought the tire iron flat across the outside of the man's right knee. Not a breaking blow, a stopping blow. calculated to drop him sideways without putting him in a hospital designed to create exactly 3 seconds of collective hesitation in the other three, while they processed what had just happened to the one they had assumed was the answer to any problem. Those 3 seconds were enough. Cade turned and locked eyes with the one who had been crouching, the one who had flicked the old man's face. He held that eye contact with the flat steadiness of someone who has already done the calculation and arrived at a place past negotiating. "Get him up," Cade said, and something in his voice made the sentence something other than a request. The leader looked at Cade, really looked. The way people look when they are reading something fast and finding that the text does not say what they expected. Whatever he found in Cade's face, whatever he read there, in that half-second of honest assessment, was apparently enough. "Not worth it," the leader said. He stepped back. His crew followed. They did not run. They walked with the careful speed of people who want to look like they are choosing to leave, rather than being made to, which is its own kind of answer. They rounded the corner of the cinder block wall and were gone inside 30 seconds. Cade stood with the tire iron still in his hand and watched the corner until he was certain they were not coming back. Then he lowered his arm and turned to the man on the ground. The man was already pushing himself up, slow, favoring his right knee, moving with the deliberateness of someone whose body has been through enough that it files complaints before cooperating. Cade reached down without asking and took his arm and helped him the rest of the way. The man stood. He was taller than he had looked on the ground. He dusted off his vest with his uninjured hand, a gesture so automatic it looked like something he had done after harder mornings than this one, and looked at Cade with an expression that was difficult to read at first. Not gratitude exactly, something more careful than gratitude. The kind of look that belongs to a person who is trying to understand something that has genuinely surprised them. The name on his vest said Ray. "Friends call me Iron Ray," the man said. His voice was gravel and smoke, and underneath both of those things something warm, the kind of warmth that takes decades to develop and does not announce itself. Cade nodded once. "Your lip is still bleeding. I have had worse." They walked to the motorcycle together without discussing it. Cade crouched and ran his hands along the frame, checking the fork, looking at the front tire from 2 angles. Nothing structural. The mirrors had been knocked out of alignment. He straightened them and stood. "You ride?" Ray asked. "No, I work on them. Shop on the Route 66 extension. Briggs's place." Something shifted in Ray's face. Slight, barely visible. "I know that shop," he said. "Good work there." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The street behind the old station had gone back to its ordinary sounds. A car passing on the main road. A dog somewhere. The woman with the grocery bags had continued walking. The boy on the bicycle was gone. The man from the laundromat doorway had gone inside. "You did not have to do that," Ray said. His voice was quiet enough that the words were just between the two of them. "I know," Cade said. "Most people do not." "I noticed." Ray looked at him with an attention that was different from the way strangers normally look at each other. It had weight to it. The weight of someone who is not simply observing but filing something away carefully for later. "What is your name, son Cade?" "Cade Merritt." "You live around here, Cape Verde?" "About 40 minutes that way." He gestured. Ray nodded. He mounted the motorcycle with some effort, his right knee clearly bothering him, and settled into the seat and looked at Cade one more time. "You ever need anything, Cade Merritt?" he said. "You look for Iron Ray. Anybody in this town can find me." Cade said nothing. "Take care of that lip," he said instead. Ray made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a grunt, and rolled the motorcycle out of the lot and onto the street. Cade watched him go, then turned and started the 40-minute walk home. He did not think about what had happened. He thought about the carburetor he had been working on when Gus Briggs told him to pack up. He thought about his mother's appointment with the specialist at the end of the month and whether the new medication was helping or producing different problems to manage. He thought about the porch light at Eleanor Voss's house 2 doors down, which he had noticed flickering the previous morning and needed to check before she tripped on the steps in the dark. He did not tell his mother what happened. He came in through the side door, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and sat down at the table where Donna Merritt had made beans and rice and set out 2 glasses of water the way she had done for 18 years, regardless of what else the day had produced. "How was it?" she asked. "Fine, same as usual." She looked at him the way she always looked at him, with the elevated attention of a woman who has been reading this particular face since it belonged to a 3-year-old and knows when something is being left out. But she did not press. That was one of the things about his mother that Cade had spent his whole life both relying on and understanding more as he got older. She knew when to ask and when to let a thing breathe. They talked about her appointment, about the new medication and whether the nausea was better or just different, about the neighbor Mrs. Aldridge down the block who had offered to drive Donna to the pharmacy twice last week, which Donna appreciated and felt guilty about simultaneously. Cade told her not to feel guilty. He said he would figure out the money situation. He always said that. He meant it every time. After dinner, he went out to the back steps. The sky over Kingman went purple and then dark in that order. He sat on the concrete and listened to the neighborhood settle into itself and thought about the expression on the man's face in those 2 seconds before Cade had moved. The split lip, the bleeding palm, the way the old man had looked up at the one crouching over him with something that was not fear and was not defeat, just the patient arithmetic of a man taking stock of what he was dealing with. He thought about the people who had watched, not with judgment. He had been one of those people before. Most people had. There was a paralysis that came with witnessing something like that in public, a freeze that was not cowardice, so much as the brain running its calculations faster than the body could respond. And by the time the calculation finished, the moment had moved on, and the decision had been made by default. He understood that. He did not think those people were bad people. He just could not be them. He did not know exactly why. He had tried to locate the reason once or twice and found only the fact of it, which was that when the calculation finished in him, it finished differently. It finished with his feet already moving. He picked up his phone, almost texted Beckett about it. Put the phone back down. Some things sound smaller than they were when you compress them into a text message, and some things sound larger. Either way, they become a different thing than what actually happened. What had happened behind the old Texaco station felt private in a way he did not have precise language for. Not secret, just not yet a story. Still the thing itself. He went inside and went to sleep. The next morning was the same as every morning. He was at Gus Briggs's shop by 6. The shop on the Route 66 extension had been there since before Cade was born, and it had the look and smell of a place that has been doing the same honest work for long enough that the work has become part of the walls. Oil in the concrete, metal in the air, the quiet of a space where the people inside are not performing their labor, but simply doing it. Gus Briggs was 63 years old and compact in the way of men who have spent decades in physical work and let it reshape them. He had given Cade the apprenticeship 8 months ago after a conversation that lasted 4 minutes and ended with a handshake, and the question, "Can you show up every day and not complain?" Cade had said yes. He had meant it the way he meant most things, completely and without theatrical emphasis. 2 bikes were waiting, a 2019 Harley Softail with brake issues and a vintage Indian that belonged to a collector in Phoenix who had trailered it up with very specific written instructions. Cade started with the Harley. Around 9, a woman he had never seen came to the shop door and stood in the frame for a moment before coming in. She was in her 40s, professional looking, in the way of someone who has learned to dress for situations she plans to control. She asked about mechanic recommendations in the area, asked a few questions about the kind of work the shop did, thanked Gus pleasantly and left. Cade did not think about it. Around 11, a man came in asking about tires for a model Cade had never heard of. The question did not quite add up. The man left without buying anything. At 12:30, Cade was eating lunch on the bench outside when a truck he did not recognize drove slowly past the shop. He watched it out of habit, probably looking for an address, he thought. He went back to his sandwich. What he did not know was that the woman had made 2 phone calls before she reached the parking lot. What he did not know was that the truck had passed twice before he came outside. What he did not know was that 240 miles away, in a building that smelled of motor oil and decades of use, a man was sitting at a long wooden table with a split lip that had begun to heal and a right hand wrapped in clean white cloth, listening to a phone call that was now ending. Raymond Holt set the receiver down. He was not a man who'd made decisions quickly or announced them loudly. He had been doing this long enough to know that the decisions worth making rarely required either of those things. He was 61 years old and had been riding for 4 decades and had been chapter president of his club for 19 years. And in that time, he had built something that was not simply a motorcycle club, the way most people understood the term. It was a code, a set of principles about who you were supposed to be when nobody was watching and what you owed the world and what you could reasonably ask of it in return. He had a split lip and a bandaged hand and the memory of a particular face. Across the table from him sat Roy Haskell and Dale Sutton. Roy was 58 long and weathered with the settled quality of a man who had processed most of his feelings long enough ago that what remained was simply judgment. Dale was younger, compact, and methodical, the kind of man who never entered a room without having already thought about what information he might need in it. "Tell me what they found," Ray said. Dale set a notepad on the table. 18 years old, he said. Lives with his mother on Cape Verde. Single-parent household. Mother is dealing with a chronic health condition. Ongoing medical costs. He has been at Briggs's shop for 8 months. 60-plus hours most weeks. No record. No incidents of any kind. What else? Neighbors say he spends his weekends fixing cars for free. Tells people he is just practicing. He paused. We talked to an Eleanor Voss. Retired woman lives 2 doors down from the Merritts. She says the Merritt boy has been buying her groceries roughly twice a month for the past 6 months. Ray's jaw moved. Not quite a reaction. Something more contained. She thought it was from a church charity program for the first 4 months. Dale continued before she figured out it was him. He had been leaving the bags at her door early in the morning before she was up. He'd buy them with his own money. Dale nodded, checked his hours against his paycheck and the store receipts. His own money. The room was quiet for a moment. There is more, Dale said. He applied for 2 assistance programs in the last year. One local one connected to his mother's medical team. Turned both down. Both times he said there were families who needed it more than his. Roy leaned forward slightly but said nothing. And he turned down a better job, Dale said. 8 months ago, before he started at Briggs' place. A bigger shop offered him a position. Better pay, shorter hours, closer to home. He turned it down a week after the Briggs apprenticeship came through. Why, Ray said. Dale turned a page. He had found out that Gus Briggs gave an apprenticeship 2 years earlier to a young man named Chris Adler, 22 years old at the time. Drug history, prior conviction, nobody else in the city willing to hire him. Briggs took him on. Adler turned it into something. He is in Tucson now, working at a fabrication shop, doing well by any measure. Cade Merritt found out about it. Decided that was the kind of shop he wanted to work in. The table was quiet. Roy said, did he know about the video? We are monitoring his texts. He has not mentioned it to anyone. Not his mother, not his friend Beckett, not Briggs, nobody. Ray sat with that for a moment. Then he said something quietly that was not quite a question and not quite a statement. Roy had been riding with him long enough to know the difference, and this fell into a third category that Ray only used rarely in the moments when something had moved him enough that the words came out sideways. He said, he was not brave. Roy waited. Brave is when you are scared and you move anyway. Ray's voice was even. He was not scared. You could see it. He was just there, already decided, like the decision had been made long before that alley. Roy looked briefly at the ceiling, the look of a man absorbing something that has shifted his understanding of the situation. Dale, Ray said, where are we on riders? Preliminary commitments from 3 chapters. Roy has been working the 4th. We are looking at somewhere between 250 and 300 if Flagstaff comes in full. Tell Flagstaff to come in full. Roy pulled out his phone. Ray stood. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at the two of them with the expression he reserved for moments when a decision had already been made and what remained was simply the execution. I want every rider in Kingman in 72 hours, he said. Day after tomorrow, a Wednesday, a work day. I want people to be out. I want traffic on that street. I want it to be the kind of thing you cannot miss if you are anywhere near the Route 66 extension. He paused. We come in clean. Formation. Engines off the moment the last bike stops. When we pull up, everything stops. That is what I want that boy to walk out to. Roy was already dialing. And I want to know everything about Briggs, Ray said. The shop, what condition it is in, what it needs, the full picture. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. One more thing, he said. He looked at Dale. Nobody approaches Cade Merritt directly. Not until Wednesday. He does not know we are watching, and I do not want him to feel like he is being examined. He has not done anything wrong. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. This needs to feel right when it comes. The real things always do. He walked out. Behind him, two phones were already in use, already beginning to move the gears of something that would in 72 hours bring the streets of a small Arizona city to a complete and astonished standstill. In the shop on the Route 66 extension, Cade Merritt was fitting a brake caliper to spec on a 2019 Softail and thinking about nothing except the torque reading in front of him. He did not feel the future arriving. He never did. That evening, he stopped at the corner store on the way home. He bought a bag of rice, a can of black beans, 2 avocados, and a bar of dark chocolate he would give his mother because she liked it with her evening tea. He paid with cash and counted the change back carefully the way his mother had taught him when he was 9. Outside the store, he passed Eleanor Voss's house. The porch light was out. He stopped and looked at it for a moment. The bulb or the fixture he could not tell from the sidewalk. He made a note to check it Thursday morning before work before she was up because she was in her 70s, and the step down from the porch had a lip on it that you would not see in the dark if you did not know it was there. He went home. He did not look at social media. He ate dinner with his mother, told her about the Indian with the specific owner instructions, made her laugh once about something small, and washed the dishes while she sat at the table and read. He was asleep by 10. He had no idea that while he was noting a burned-out porch light and buying avocados and making his mother laugh, the 31-second clip from behind the old Texaco station was moving through the world. Quietly at first, the way these things begin, then less quietly, 12,000 views, then 40, then a woman in Texas with 2 million followers found it and stitched it with 3 sentences of commentary and posted her version, and that version moved differently. The way things move when they find the current. The original clip crossed 100,000 views at 2 in the morning. Cade Merritt slept through all of it. He found out the way he found out about most things that mattered too late from someone else in the blunt, compressed language of a text message that had already loaded before he had fully decided to read it. Beckett sent it at 7:14 the next morning. 4 words and a link. Bro, is this you? Cade clicked the link. He watched himself for 31 seconds. Shaky vertical phone footage the camera held by someone trying to look casual about recording. It started at the moment he came around the cinder block wall. It caught the tire iron coming out of his bag. It showed the large one going sideways. It showed the leader looking at Cade's face for one long calculating second and then making his decision. It showed the old man getting to his feet. Then it cut. Cade set the phone face down on the kitchen table. He sat with it. His mother was still asleep. The coffee maker was running. Through the thin wall of the rental house, he could hear Mrs. Aldridge's radio from down the block, something faint and indistinct. He picked the phone back up and typed, "Yeah, don't share it." Beckett responded in 11 seconds. "Cade, it has 140,000 views." Cade stared at that number. 140,000 people had watched a 31-second clip of something that had lasted less time than it takes to boil water. Something that he had walked away from and gone home and eaten dinner and slept through something that to him had been a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a 40-minute walk. And apparently to 140,000 people, it was something else entirely. He could not yet find the words for what it was to them. He would have months to work on that question and would never fully arrive at an answer. He put the phone in his pocket and laced his boots and went to work. Gus Briggs was standing at the front of the shop when Kate arrived, which was unusual. Gus was typically in the back by 6, already under something already with grease on his hands. He was standing at the front with his arms folded and an expression Kate could not read immediately, but that had something careful in it. "You want to tell me something?" Gus said. "About what?" Gus held up his phone. Different account, same clip. The view counter on this version read 280,000. The number had grown in the time it had taken Cade to walk from his house to the shop. Cade exhaled through his nose. "It was on the way home yesterday. I did not plan it." "I am not asking if you planned it," Gus said. He looked at Cade steadily. "I am asking why you did not tell me." "Because it did not seem like something to tell." Gus was quiet. Then he lowered the phone and nodded once slowly, the private confirming nod of a man who has just received the answer he was looking for and found that it confirmed something he already believed. "Okay," Gus said. "Get to work. The Indian needs the carburetor finished before noon." That was the end of it between the two of them. But it was not the end of it anywhere else. By 10, two local news vans had parked in front of the shop. By 10:30, a reporter Kate had never seen was at the door with a recorder and a polished opener about the viral clip and the community response. Cade said no. Gus stood behind him and said it more firmly. The reporter left a card on the counter. By 11, the view count on the original post had passed 500,000. Cade knew this because Beckett would not stop texting. He set Beckett's last message unread, placed the phone screen down on the workbench, and went back to the carburetor. What he could not see from inside the shop was the shape of what was already assembling itself around him. Not in Kingman, not yet, but across the state and across several states beyond that. In parking lots and meeting rooms, in the back sections of shops that smelled exactly like his own shop. Men looking at their phones and then looking at each other. Men who had been around long enough to know the difference between something that looked real and something that actually was. 240 miles away, Dale Sutton was sitting in front of 3 open laptops and a cold cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes. He had been tracking every major account that had posted the clip, every significant share, every comment thread that mentioned Cade Merritt by name. He was building a picture. Not the picture the internet was drawing, but the one underneath it. The one you could only see if you were paying the kind of attention that most people did not have the patience or the reason to pay. He called Roy at 12:40. "Roy," he said, "I found something." "What kind of something?" Dale told him about the job offer from 8 months ago. The bigger shop, the better pay, the shorter hours. The decision Cade had made to turn it down. Roy waited for the reason. "Because of how Briggs had once handled a young man named Chris Adler," Dale said. "Record drug history, nobody else in the city willing to touch him. Briggs gave him a chance and Adler built something with it. Cade found out about it and decided that was the kind of place he wanted to work." The line was quiet for a moment. "Did Ray ask you to find this?" Roy said. "No, I found it on my own. Tell him in the morning." Dale closed one of the laptops. Through the window, he could see the sky beginning its slow transition from black to something slightly less than black at the eastern edge. He thought about something Ray had said before the rider count, before the logistics, before the phone started ringing across 4 chapters. Ray had said the hardest thing to find is a person who does good because it is the only thing that makes sense to them. Not for credit, not for leverage, not because someone is watching. Dale had asked you, "Think he is really like that?" And Ray had said, "I was on the ground. I looked up and I saw his face in the moment before he moved." He was not brave. Brave is when you are scared and you move anyway. He was not scared. He was just there. Already decided. Dale sat with that in the quiet of the early morning. Somewhere in Kingman, Cade Merritt was at his workbench with his phone face down and a carburetor in his hands, and no idea that by the time he went home that evening, The clip would have crossed 1 million views and kept going. And somewhere in the organized distance between 4 chapters and one small city, 300 motorcycles were preparing to move. Beckett's next text came in at 7:14 on Wednesday morning, but by the time Kate had read it and set his phone face down on the kitchen table and picked it back up and read it again, there were already 2 voicemails from numbers he did not recognize, and a missed call from a Phoenix area code, and 47 other notifications stacked behind the one from Beckett like freight cars on a single track. He did not open any of them. He put the phone in his pocket and finished lacing his boots and went to work. The walk was the same as every other morning. Same 40 minutes, same streets, same yards with the same dogs. The mesquite trees on the long stretch before the Route 66 extension were doing the same thing they always did in the early heat, holding their shape against the sky with a patient permanence that had nothing to do with what was happening in his pocket. He passed Eleanor Voss's house and noted that the porch light was still out and added it to the list of things that needed doing before the week was over. He was not thinking about the clip. He was thinking about the Indian's carburetor and whether the float valve he had ordered had come in yet, and whether Gus would want him to start on the Softail's brake lines before or after lunch. He was thinking about his mother's appointment at the end of the month and the paperwork she kept putting off because paperwork from medical offices had a way of making things feel more real than she wanted them to feel before she had to. He was thinking about everything except the thing that 140,000 people were apparently thinking about simultaneously. Gus Briggs was in the back when Kate arrived, which was the normal order of things, but he came to the door of the workroom within 30 seconds of Kate coming through the front, which was not. He had his phone in his hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of a man who has been sitting with something for an hour and has decided to let it out. "My daughter called me this morning," Gus said. Cade looked up from the hook where he was hanging his bag. "She lives in Tucson," Gus said. "She saw the video." He paused. "She called to ask if the mechanic in it worked for me." Cade waited. "I told her yes," Gus said. Another pause. Longer this time. "She cried," Gus said simply. He said it the way you say a fact that surprised you when it happened and is still surprising you now. Then he turned and went back to the workbench, and Cade stood in the front room for a moment with that information and then went to find the carburetor. By 10 o'clock, there were 2 news vans on the street outside. By 10:30, a reporter was at the door again, different from the one yesterday, younger, with the energy of someone who has been told this is a significant story and has decided to treat it that way. Gus handled it. Cade heard the conversation from the back room without being able to make out the words, heard Gus's voice low and final, heard the door close. At 11, Beckett sent a screenshot of a news article from a Phoenix outlet with Cade's name in the headline. Cade looked at it for 3 seconds and put the phone down and went back to the carburetor because the carburetor was in front of him and needed finishing before noon, and the view count was not something he could affect from inside a shop in Kingman, Arizona. At 12:30, he ate lunch on the bench outside. A man came in to pick up a bike and mentioned with the delicacy of someone sharing news, they assume the other person has not heard that the clip had crossed 1 million views sometime in the last hour. Cade thanked him. He went back inside and finished the carburetor. The afternoon brought a city councilman who came in person and left without getting a statement. A phone call to the shop's landline from a production company in Los Angeles that Gus declined with the same flat courtesy he applied to everything he declined, and a second wave of media vehicles that parked on the street and pointed cameras at the front of the shop in the patient way of people who have learned that waiting is most of the job. Cade worked. At 4, he could hear people on the sidewalk outside talking about the clip. Not about him specifically, just the clip, the way people talk about something they have all seen and are still processing. He could hear that cadence through the shop's thin front wall. He had been the subject of it all day without being part of it once, which was a strange thing to be inside of, like standing in the eye of something while the weather moved around you. He closed up at 5 and walked home. Same route, same 40 minutes. The evening air had that quality it gets in the Arizona desert when the heat begins to release from the ground. Not cool exactly, but less insistent, the temperature negotiating with itself towards something livable. He stopped at the corner store and bought rice and tomatoes and a bar of dark chocolate for his mother because she had mentioned that morning that she was almost out. He walked the last stretch in the cooling light and did not look at his phone. His mother was at this kitchen table when he came in. She had the look he recognized, the careful, suspended expression of a woman who has been sitting with information for several hours and has made a decision about how to receive it that she is now revising in real time. She had her phone on the table in front of her, face up. "Cade," she said. Her voice was even. "Sit down." He set the groceries on the counter and sat. She turned the phone around, the same clip. Somebody he did not know had reposted it on a platform he barely used, and it had found its way to Maria Gutierrez at the clinic where his mother went for her monthly check-ins. And Maria Gutierrez had sent it to Donna Merritt at 2:15 that afternoon with a message that said simply, "Is this your son?" "It is me," Cade said before she could ask. Donna looked at him. She had a quality when she was managing something large, a stillness that was not distance but its opposite, a heightened presence that meant she was taking everything in and not letting any of it escape before she was ready. He had grown up knowing that stillness. He had learned to read it the way sailors read water. "Are you all right?" she said. "Nobody touched me. That is not what I am asking." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. He could see the effort it cost her, the careful internal work of a woman who had been holding things together alone for long enough that she had become very good at it and very tired of being good at it simultaneously. "Cade," she said. Her voice had changed. The careful composure had reached its edge and gone over it just slightly, just enough for him to hear it. "I need you to not do things like this without telling me." "I know," he said. "I am sorry." "Are you, Because I know you." She looked at him with an expression that had too many things in it to name individually. "And I know that if it happened again tomorrow, you would do exactly the same thing." He looked at the table. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." She made a sound then. Not quite a breath and not quite something else. The sound of a person arriving at the place past composure that exists just before something either breaks or gets stronger. He was not sure which way it was going to go until she stood up and went to the stove, and he understood that the conversation was both over and also just beginning. That they would come back to it the way people come back to the things that have frightened them most slowly in pieces over the next several days. He stood and put the rice and tomatoes on the counter and said, "I will cook." She said, "I already started." He stood next to her and they did not say anything else for a while. And in the silence of that kitchen, with the evening coming in through the window above the sink, that was exactly the right amount. That night he did something he had not done since the previous morning. He searched his own name. He typed it into his phone and let the results load and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, with the screen the only light in the room. The numbers had stopped being real to him in any meaningful sense sometime around the second million. They were digits attached to something that felt like it had happened to a different version of him in a parallel city. The original clip, the Texas woman's repost, a news article from the Phoenix outlet, a piece from a national wire service. His name in 4 different headlines in 4 different fonts. But it was the comments that stopped him. Not because there were thousands of them, though there were, because of what they said. People writing from Minnesota, from rural Georgia, from suburban Ohio, from places he had never been and could barely picture. A man who said he was 63 years old, writing that he had watched the clip 4 times and was ashamed of a moment from 30 years ago that he had never told anyone about. A woman writing that she was showing it to her teenage son because she had run out of words for the things she was trying to explain to him. A man who wrote simply, "I drove past someone who needed help last week and kept going. I have thought about it every day since. This kid is better than me." Cade set the phone face down on his chest. He stared at the ceiling. He was 18 years old. He worked 60 hours a week in a shop that smelled of oil and honest labor. He could not afford to fix the truck he shared with his mother. He bought groceries for an old woman 2 doors down and told himself it was practice for the day when he could do more. He had done what he did behind the old Texaco station because the alternative was standing there watching, and his body had apparently reached some threshold, some point he could not locate on a map, past which standing there watching was no longer a thing it was capable of doing. He did not feel like what the comments were describing. He felt like himself. The gap between those two things was wide and disorienting, and he lay in it for a long time without finding the edges. Beckett texted at 11:47. Dude, there is a news truck outside your house. Cade went to the window. There was. He went back to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the man from the comment, the one who had driven past someone and kept going, and thought about it every day since. He thought about the people who had stood outside the old Texaco station and watched. He did not think about them with contempt. He thought about them the way you think about a version of yourself that could have existed under slightly different conditions. He thought about the 2 seconds. The thing about those 2 seconds that he had never been able to explain, not to Beckett, not to himself when he tried to put language to it, was that they had not felt like a decision. They had felt like the end of holding something back, like a door opening, like something that had always been going to happen finally reaching the moment it was scheduled for. He fell asleep sometime after midnight. He woke at 5:45 with the solution to the Indian's float valve problem already assembled in his head, which was the kind of thing his brain did when it had been left alone long enough. He got dressed. He ate the leftover rice standing at the counter. He left the house at 6:10. It was Wednesday. He was halfway down the block when he heard it. Low at first, the kind of sound that registers in the sternum before the ears have fully processed it. He thought it was a truck. Then he thought it was several trucks. Then something about the quality of the sound made him stop walking because it was wrong for trucks. Too even. Too many individual engines finding the same frequency. Too deliberate. He stood on the sidewalk and listened. The sound was coming from the west, from the direction of the industrial area a mile out from the Route 66 extension. It was getting louder in the steady way of something that has a destination and has been organized around reaching it. He kept walking. By the time he turned onto the Route 66 extension, he could see that the people on the sidewalk had stopped moving. A woman with a stroller had turned to face the sound. A man walking a dog had gone completely still, and the dog had sat down beside him as if it had picked up the signal from the man's legs. An older couple outside the diner, 2 doors from the shop, stood with their coffee cups halfway to their mouths suspended. Then the first motorcycle came around the corner. Then the second. Then they kept coming. They came in tight formation, 2 across, measured and controlled, not a parade and not a procession, but something more deliberate than either word could hold. Every rider in leather. Most of them gray-haired or white-haired men whose faces had been shaped by decades of weather and work and the decisions that leave marks you can see. They moved through the street with the contained energy of something that had been organized down to the last detail and was executing exactly as planned. Cade was still on the sidewalk half a block from the shop. He stopped walking. He stood and watched them come and counted to 30 and stopped counting because the number had already exceeded anything the counting was useful for. He started walking again, faster now. When he reached the shop, Gus was already at the front window. He turned when Cade came through the door, and there was something on his face that Cade had not seen in 8 months of working for the man. Something past surprise. Something that surprise turns into when it has had a few minutes to settle into understanding. How many? Cade said. Gus looked back out the window. I count patches from at least 4 chapters, he said quietly. Could be 250. Could be more. They kept coming. The sound filled the street and then overfilled it, pressing against the storefronts and the apartments above them and the people who had come out of every business on the block. The woman from the laundromat, the man from the insurance office, people from the diner still holding their coffee. 2 teenage boys appearing on the roof of the building across the street with their phones already out. Then one by one the engines cut. It started at the front of the formation and moved backward like a wave. One engine, then another, then another. The sound dying in sections, each section silence, making the next engine's cut more audible, until the last one somewhere at the far end of the block went quiet, and the silence that replaced the whole thing was so sudden and so complete that Cade heard a woman in the crowd say something to her child in a voice barely above a whisper. 300 riders standing in the street, not moving, not speaking. Gus turned from the window and looked at Cade with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up to it. "I think they are here for you," Gus said. Cade's hands were still holding the shop rag he had picked up from the bench out of habit when he came in. He looked down at it, grease under his nails from yesterday, a small burn on his left forearm from a pipe fitting 3 days ago. He was wearing the same gray work shirt he wore every Wednesday. He had not shaved since Sunday. He walked to the door and opened it and went outside. The silence pressed against him from all sides, the weight of that many people deciding collectively not to make a sound. He had never felt anything quite like it, and he did not have a category for it, and he stood with it for a moment on the sidewalk in the morning light, and then straightened without thinking about it and stood to his full height. A figure moved through the riders from somewhere in the middle of the formation. People parted for him without being asked, the easy, unconscious parting of people who have been moving out of this particular man's way for long enough that it has become instinct. He walked with a slight catch in his right knee, the same knee Cade had noticed in the vacant lot, and his face was exactly as Cade remembered it. Gray beard, dark eyes, the leather vest with its worn patches. The split in his lip had gone from open wound to healing line. Iron Ray walked until he was standing 10 feet from Cade on the sidewalk. The two of them looked at each other. "You remember me," Ray said. "I remember you," Cade said. "You did not tell anyone." Cade shook his head slightly. Did not seem like something to tell. Something moved across Ray's face then. Not a smile. Deeper than that. More considered. He turned and looked at the formation behind him, at the 300 riders standing in silence on a Wednesday morning on a street in a small Arizona city, and then he turned back, and his voice shifted into a register meant to carry. "My name is Raymond Holt," he said. "Most people know me as Iron Ray. I have been riding for 40 years. I have been with my club for 35. 2 days ago, 4 men knocked me to the ground in a vacant lot 2 blocks from here." He paused. There were people watching. More than 10 people within sight of what was happening. Not one of them took a single step. The street was absolutely silent, except one. He pointed at Cade, not a dramatic gesture, a direct one. The way you point at something that is simply factually, undeniably true. This young man, Ray said, walked into a situation that everyone else walked away from. He was 18 years old. He was on his way home from a 10-hour shift. He had a tire iron in his hand because he had been working with one all day and forgotten to put it back. He did not know me. He had no reason to help me. And he moved before I had finished asking. Cade's jaw was tight. He was looking at Ray. He was aware of the cameras, 2 news crews he could see, and likely more he could not aware of the crowd that had grown on the sidewalks while the riders were arriving. Aware of Gus standing in the doorway of the shop behind him. He was aware of all of it and attending to none of it, his attention entirely on the gray-bearded man 10 feet away. After it was over, Ray said he helped me check my bike. He told me to take care of my lip. He walked home and did not mention it to a single person. A murmur moved through the riders, low, like something settling into place. "I have been in this life long enough to know what character looks like," Ray said. "And I have been around long enough to know how rare it is to find it in someone this young. Consistently. In places where nobody was watching." He looked at Cade directly. "We did our homework, son. We know about the groceries. We know about the cars you fixed for free on your weekends. We know you turned down assistance programs because you thought other families needed them more. We know you took the harder job because you respected the kind of man running it." Cade's chest was doing something complicated. He kept his face still through a degree of effort he had not needed to apply in a long time. "I am not here to embarrass you," Ray said. His voice had dropped enough that the words were primarily for Cade, even if the microphones caught them. "I am here because my people do not walk away from debts, and I am here because this city needed to see you. Not on a phone screen. Right here." He extended his hand. Cade took it. The moment their hands connected, something happened in the crowd that had nothing to do with the riders who maintained their stillness. It came from the people on the sidewalks, the woman from the laundromat, the man from the insurance office, the couple from the diner. It was not quite applause and not quite cheering. It was something rarer than either of those things, the sound that comes out of people when something happens that they have been, without knowing it, waiting a long time to see. Cade shook the hand, and then, because his eyes had gone embarrassingly wet, and he did not know what else to do with that, he pulled the older man forward and held on for a moment. Ray's hand came up and gripped the back of his shoulder and stayed there. The two of them stood like that on a Wednesday morning sidewalk in Kingman, Arizona, while 300 riders watched in silence, and the cameras recorded what they could of something that was not entirely capturable. Then Ray pulled back and looked at him. "You good?" Ray said. "Yeah," Cade said. His voice held. "Just barely." "Yeah, I am good." A flatbed truck had been positioned up the block while the formation was arriving. Cade had not noticed it. A large monitor was mounted on its bed, and a technician was connecting a cable, and then the screen came on, and the 31-second clip from behind the old Texaco station played at street volume. Cade watched himself. He watched it the way he had not been able to watch it on his phone Tuesday morning, with distance, with the strange doubled quality of seeing your own face from outside your own head. The face in the clip was not doing what he would have predicted. It was not angry. It was not afraid. It was not performing anything. It was simply fully present, fully committed to what was already happening. He looked at that face for 31 seconds and found that he did not entirely recognize it, and that the not recognizing told him something he did not yet have words for. "That is the young man who stepped up," Ray was telling a reporter who had moved into his left. 18 years old. Works 60 hours a week in that shop right there. He moved before his brain told him not to. The reporter asked what this meant to Ray personally. "It means I have a debt," Ray said, "and my people do not carry debts." He turned back to Cade. "Your mother," he said quietly. "She is on her way." Cade looked at his phone. He had 3 missed calls from Donna in the last 20 minutes. "I will call her," he said. He stepped away from the formation far enough to hear his own voice. He called her back. She picked up before the first ring had finished. "Cade," she said. Her voice had the quality it got when she was past the point of managing how it sounded. "I am watching the news right now, and there are motorcycles on your street." "I know. I am looking at them." "Are you all right?" "I am fine. I am standing right here." "You do not sound fine." "Mom, Cade." And now she was not trying anymore. He could hear her crying on the other end of the line. Not the loud kind, the quiet, exhausted kind that comes from a woman who has been holding too many things together for too many years and has just been confronted with the sight of the world moving for once in her son's direction. "You never told me about the man in the lot." It did not feel important. "It is important." She stopped. "You are important." Her voice strengthened. "I need you to know that I know that, even when I do not say it enough. You are the most important thing in my life, and I need you to not get yourself killed helping strangers with a tire iron." He almost laughed. "I mean it. I know you mean it, but I am also—" She stopped. "I am so proud of you." Her voice broke on the last word in a way he had only heard a handful of times in 18 years. "I am so proud of you that I can barely stand up right now." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the 300 motorcycles standing silent on his street. He looked at the crowd that had grown to somewhere past 200 civilians. He looked at the monitor on the flatbed truck showing a local news channel broadcasting a live feed of the exact scene he was standing in. "Come down here," he said, "as soon as you can. Borrow Eleanor's car if she will let you. I want you to see this in person." She said she would. He hung up and turned back to the street. Ray was looking at him from 20 feet away with the patient expression of a man who has time and knows it. Cade walked back to him. "My mother is coming," Cade said. "Good." Ray nodded once. I want to meet her. Why? Because Ray said, his voice carrying no performance in it whatsoever. Any woman who raised you the way you were raised in the circumstances you were raised in is someone worth meeting. Cade had no answer for that. He looked at the ground for a moment and then back up. What happens now, he asked. Now Ray said we wait for your mother, and then we go somewhere quieter. And then I am going to put something on the table. He paused. You can say no. I want to be clear about that up front. Whatever I offer, you can walk away from it, and I will still consider the debt paid, and you will still be a friend of mine. He held Cade's eyes. But I would rather you did not say no. Cade looked at him for a moment. You have been looking for someone, Cade said. It was not quite a question. The corner of Ray's mouth moved in the direction of something that on a different face would have been called a smile. A long time, Ray said. Come on, let us wait for your mother. Donna Merritt arrived 35 minutes later in Eleanor Voss's old Buick, which she had borrowed still warm from the driveway 2 blocks over. She parked at the near end of the block and stepped out and saw the motorcycles and stopped with one hand still on the car door. She was a small woman. She barely reached Cade's chin. She had the look of someone who had been preparing herself on the drive over and had arrived to find that preparation was not going to be sufficient. Cade was at the car before she had taken 2 steps. She grabbed him by both arms and looked at him the way his mother had been looking at him his entire life, with the specific attention of a woman who needs to confirm with her own eyes that the person in front of her is intact. Then she pulled him in and held on. You are okay, she said into his shoulder. I am completely okay. She pulled back. She looked at the street. She looked at the riders and the cameras and the crowd and the monitor on the flatbed truck. She took all of it in with the composed thoroughness of a woman who has learned that the way you receive large things matters. Which one is he, she said. Cade nodded toward Ray, who was standing with Roy and Dale 20 feet away, deliberately not looking at them, giving them the space with the ease of a man who understood what that kind of space was worth. Donna looked at Raymond Holt for a long moment. She took in the vest, the gray beard, the wrapped hand, the way he stood with the weight of someone who has been the heaviest thing in most rooms for long enough that he no longer thinks about it. Then she straightened her shoulders in the way Cade had watched her do his entire life. The squaring up that meant she was walking into something that required her full self. Take me to him, she said. They crossed the sidewalk. Ray saw them coming and turned. He looked at Donna Merritt with the direct attentiveness of a man who is genuinely trying to see someone, not assess them. Mrs. Merritt, he said. He waited. Donna looked at him. Your lip is healing, she said. It is, Ray said. My son did that. Got you back on your feet. He did. She nodded slowly. I have been trying to get him to slow down and let someone else handle things for about 15 years. She looked at Ray steadily. It has not worked yet. Ray looked at her, then carefully with no performance in it, he said, You raised him right, ma'am. Alone. That is not nothing. Donna held his gaze. Something in her face settled. Not softened. Settled. The way a decision feels when you have been carrying its weight long enough and have finally found somewhere solid to set it down. All right, she said. 2 words. But they landed in the space between the 4 of them with enough weight that Roy, standing 6 feet away, looked briefly at the ground. Cade reached over and found his mother's hand and held it. She held his back. They rode to Ray's building in Roy's truck, the 4 of them, Cade and Donna, in the back. Ray in the passenger seat, Roy driving. Gus Briggs followed in his own vehicle, having closed the shop without discussion or ceremony, simply pulling the door shut behind him and locking it with the quiet finality of a man who has decided that whatever is about to happen matters more than whatever would have happened otherwise. The convoy of riders had dispersed with the same organized quiet with which they had arrived, breaking into smaller groups and heading in different directions. The street returning to itself in under 10 minutes, the way streets do when something extraordinary is finished with them and moved on. The news vans stayed longer. They always did. But by the time Roy turned onto the highway heading east out of Kingman, the Route 66 extension was already becoming itself again. And Cade watched it recede through the rear window and thought about the woman from the laundromat who had stood on the sidewalk crying without covering her face. He had been thinking about her since the moment he noticed her. Not with sentimentality, with something more like the attention he gave to things he did not yet fully understand. She had been wearing work clothes. She had been on her way somewhere, or coming from somewhere, and the sound of 300 engines had stopped her, the way it had stopped everyone. And then she had seen whatever she saw, and it had produced something in her that she had not tried to contain. And when his gaze had passed over her, she had not looked away. She had held it. The way people hold eye contact when they want you to understand that what they are feeling is real. He thought about what she might have been thinking. He thought about the comment from the night before. The man who had driven past someone and kept going. He looked out the window at the desert moving past and said nothing, and Donna sat beside him with her hand in her lap and also said nothing, and the truck moved through the morning heat towards something none of them had complete language for yet. The building was 12 miles outside of Kingman on a straight road that ran between flat scrubland and the low, distant mountains that defined the horizon on three sides. From the outside, it was industrial. A former manufacturing space, long and low, with a metal roof and high, narrow windows and a gravel lot. Nothing about the exterior announced what was inside. What was inside took Donna a moment to absorb. The floor was clean concrete, worn smooth by decades of foot traffic and spilled oil and the weight of metal and machinery. The equipment was old but maintained with the attentiveness that makes things outlast their design specifications by years. There were photographs on the walls, dozens of them in plain frames, bikes in various stages of construction, groups of men at long tables, a few portraits that had the quality of documentation rather than display, the faces of people who had been here and done work here and left something behind. In the center of the space was a long wooden table. It had the look of something that had been the site of thousands of hours of work and meals and argument and agreement, the surface worn unevenly in the way of furniture that has been genuinely used for a long time by many different people. Donna walked in slowly, taking everything in. Cade walked beside her. "This is where you build them," Cade said. It was not a question. "This is where we build everything," Ray said from behind them. They sat at the table. Roy brought coffee. Dale Sutton appeared from somewhere in the back of the building and took a seat at the far end with a notepad in front of him. Not conspicuously, simply present the way a careful man is present when the details of something important are about to be discussed. Gus came in last, accepted a cup of coffee from Roy, and took up a position against the far wall with the quiet authority of a man who has been specifically invited to witness something and understands that witnessing is its own function. Ray sat across from Cade and Donna. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them with the settled directness that was apparently his natural state. "I am going to tell you what I want to offer," he said. "And then I am going to tell you what it is not. The second part is as important as the first." Cade nodded. "Full apprenticeship," Ray said. "Under the four best custom builders, I know two of whom work in this building. You would work here learning the complete craft. Framework, engine building, bodywork, fabrication, not repairs, building from the ground up." He paused. "There is a trade program in Flagstaff that three of my people have gone through. You would attend 1 week per month, expenses covered, and work here the remaining 3 weeks at a wage that is." He glanced at Dale, who said a number quietly, and Ray repeated it to Cade. The number was more than 3 times what Gus paid him. Cade kept his face still. Beside him, he felt Donna go very quiet, in the way of a person who has just received information that requires a moment to process. "Your mother's medical situation," Ray said, and his voice shifted, more careful now, more deliberate. "I am not going to call it charity because it is not. What I am offering is a structured support arrangement connected to the foundation my club operates. It covers specialists' ongoing treatment medication costs. It is not unlimited, but it covers what the current records indicate she needs, and then some." He looked at Donna directly. "You would have access to physicians who are not on a 6-week waiting list. You would stop choosing between medication and groceries." Donna's jaw tightened, not in offense, in the effort of receiving something large without letting the effort show in a way that diminished either her or the offer. And long-term Ray said, bringing his attention back to Cade, if you do the work, if you demonstrate over the next 2 years what I already believe you are capable of, I want to talk to you about a partnership stake in what we are building here. Not ownership, a stake, real responsibility, real voice, real skin in the game. He stopped. He let it sit. Cade looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. You said there was a second part. There is. Ray's voice did not change. This is not a reward. I need you to understand that clearly. If you take this thinking it is a reward, you will spend the next 2 years feeling like you have already done enough. You have not done anything yet. He held Cade's eyes. What you did in that lot took 6 seconds. What I am offering you requires a great deal more than 6 seconds. It requires showing up when you do not want to, learning things that will frustrate you in ways you have not been frustrated before, being wrong repeatedly in front of people who are better at this than you are, and taking the correction without argument, and going home and fixing what was wrong and coming back and doing it again. He paused. You earned our respect before we met you. But respect is not the same as a free pass. It means I expect more from you, not less. It means when you make a mistake, I am going to tell you directly and I am going to expect you to fix it. He sat back slightly. That is the deal, both sides of it, the opportunity and the obligation. The room was quiet. Donna's hand found Cade's arm under the table. Not a grip, just contact. Cade looked at Ray and said, Can I ask you something first? Ask. The man at Gus's shop, the one who had the record, the drug history, the one Gus gave a chance to when nobody else would. His name is Chris Adler. Ray waited. He is in Tucson. He is at a fabrication shop doing well. Cade paused. I took the job at Gus's place partly because I wanted to understand what that looked like. Someone deciding a person was worth the trouble when nothing on paper said they were. I wanted to work in a place that did that. Ray looked at him steadily. I want to know, Cade said, if what you are building here does that. Not for me. I mean for people who do not have whatever it is I apparently have. People who have not proven themselves yet, who maybe cannot yet, who just need someone to decide they are worth the trouble. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Roy, standing near the wall, looked at the floor briefly. The look of a man who has been struck by something he was not expecting and needs a moment to absorb it. Ray took a breath. He let it out slowly. That he said is the right question, and the honest answer is not yet. But that is what I want it to become. He held Cade's eyes. That is part of why I want you here, not just to build bikes. Cade sat with that. Then he looked at his mother. Donna was watching him with the expression she always had when she was deliberately not telling him what to do. The look of a woman who had learned over 18 years that this particular person needed to arrive at his own conclusions through his own process, and that steering him even with the best intentions produced resistance rather than conviction. She was giving him the room. She always gave him the room. But he could see in her face what the medical support would mean. He could see the tiredness underneath her composure. Not the tiredness of today or this week, but the accumulated tiredness of years of fighting a system that did not make room for people who could not pay enough to be prioritized. The waiting rooms, the denied claims, the medications she had quietly stretched when the month ran short, having doses and saying nothing about it. He knew about the have doses. She did not know he knew. He looked back at Ray. I have one condition, Cade said. Ray waited. Gus Briggs, Cade said. Whatever partnership gets built here, whatever this becomes, he is part of it. Not as a favor, because he is good and he deserves it, and because he has been doing the right thing in a small shop on a difficult street for 20 years, and nobody has ever shown up for him the way you showed up for me today. From the wall, Gus made a sound. Not a word. Something that was not yet ready to be a word. Ray looked at Cade for a long moment. Then he looked at Gus. Then he looked back at Cade. You are negotiating for someone else, Ray said. inside your own negotiation. Yes, for someone else's benefit. Yes. Ray looked at Roy. Roy had his arms crossed and was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has just had something confirmed that he drove 3 hours to have confirmed. Ray put his hand across the table. Done, he said. Cade shook it. Then he looked at Gus. Gus uncrossed his arms. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the table slowly with the deliberateness of a man who was moving towards something he was not sure he was going to be invited to, and he sat down for the first time since they had arrived. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at Cade with an expression Cade had not seen on his face in 8 months of working beside him. Not the steady competence of the shop, not the contained satisfaction of work done correctly. Something older than both of those things and less defended. You did not have to do that, Gus said. I know, Cade said. Gus looked at the table, then back up. Why? Cade thought about it for a moment. Because you gave Chris a chance when nobody else would, and nobody ever showed up to thank you for it. Gus was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded once, the same slow private nod Cade had seen from him at the shop that morning, the nod that meant a person had received the answer they were looking for and found that it was sufficient. Dale produced documents, not contracts in the formal sense, but frameworks, the kind of paperwork that memorializes good faith rather than attempting to legislate it. Cade read everything. He asked about 2 specific clauses. Both questions were precise. Dale adjusted the language on the second without argument. Donna asked 4 questions about the medical support structure. They were practical and direct. Dale answered all of them. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Ray. I will not be a charity case, she said. Her voice was even. You will not be, Ray said. The obligation is to your son. The support for you is an investment in his stability. I need him focused. He cannot be focused if he is watching something preventable go unaddressed. He paused. That is not sentiment. That is practical. Donna looked at him for a long time. Then something in her face arrived somewhere. Not softened. Arrived. All right, she said. The word was small. The weight of it was not. They stayed another hour. Ray asked Cade questions about his work. Real questions, technical and specific, the kind that cannot be answered vaguely without the vagueness being immediately apparent. What he understood about frame geometry, what he had learned from the Indians' carburetor situation, what he thought was wrong with the way most apprenticeships were structured. Cade answered directly, correcting his own answers mid-sentence when he realized he was approximating rather than being precise, which happened twice. And both times Ray noticed the self-correction and said nothing about it, which told Cade something about the kind of attention the man paid. At one point, Ray said, you are going to have difficulty with my lead builder. Frank Odom. He is not an easy man to learn from. Has anyone learned from him? Cade asked. Several. Ray said it without elaboration. Then I will figure it out. Ray made the sound that was almost a laugh. He said the same thing to me 20 years ago. Word for word. When they finally stood to leave, Ray walked them to the door. At the threshold, he stopped Cade with a hand on the arm. Not grabbing. Stopping. One more thing, he said. Cade waited. The 4 men from the lot. Kingman PD has the footage and the identifications. It will move through the system. He paused. But I want you to know that we found out who they are. None of them are from here. They came through. He let a moment pass. They will not come back. Cade held his gaze. He understood what was being communicated. He understood that it was being communicated at exactly the right level of specificity, enough to be clear, not so much as to require a response. Okay, Cade said. Ray nodded. He looked at Donna. Safe drive home. Donna said thank you in a way that meant it fully. Then she and Cade walked to Eleanor Voss's Buick, and Cade held the door for his mother, and she got in and looked up at him before he closed it. Cade, she said. Yeah, you negotiated for Gus before you negotiated for yourself. He needed it more. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached up and touched his face with the brief, certain touch she had been doing since he was too small to understand it, and she said nothing, and he closed the door. He walked around and got in, and they drove back toward Kingman in the quiet of the afternoon, and neither of them spoke for several miles, and that was exactly right. His phone had collected 53 notifications while they were inside. He put it face down on the seat. The road was straight and the light was going gold at the edges, the way it did in the desert in the late afternoon, and somewhere behind them in that building, with the worn concrete floor and the photographs, and the long wooden table, Roy was already on the phone with the trade school in Flagstaff, and Dale was already drafting the formal frameworks. And Ray was standing in the middle of the shop floor, looking at a half-built frame and thinking about something Kate had said. For people who have not proven themselves yet, who just need someone to decide they are worth the trouble. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked to his desk and found a notepad and wrote 4 words at the top of a blank page. He looked at what he had written. Then he set the pen down and looked out the window at the last of the afternoon light lying flat across the scrubland. The first morning, Cade showed up at Ray's building as an apprentice. He arrived 20 minutes early and stood outside the door in the early cold, because he did not know if he was supposed to walk in. Frank Odom found him there. Frank Odom was 53 years old and built the way men are built when 3 decades of physical work have made the decisions about their body that they might not have made themselves. He had a face that suggested he had spent considerable time deciding what he thought of most things and had arrived at conclusions he was not looking to revisit. He was Ray's lead builder, the man Ray had warned about, and he looked at Cade standing outside the door in the early morning and said, "You waiting for an invitation?" "I did not know the protocol," Cade said. "Protocol is you come in when you are here. You are here. Come in." Cade came in. Frank pointed at a partially disassembled engine block on the far workbench. "Tell me what is wrong with it." Cade walked to it. He looked at it for 90 seconds without touching anything. Then he said the cases are cracked right side below the oil passage. Whoever ran it did it dry. Frank looked at him. "How long did it take you to see that?" "About 40 seconds. The other 50 I was making sure I was not wrong." Frank made a sound that existed somewhere between acknowledgement and dismissal, occupying the narrow space between those two things, with the precision of a man who had long ago decided that unearned praise was a form of damage. He went back to what he was working on. "Do not touch anything today," he said. "Watch. Ask 1 question per hour. If you ask 2, I stop answering." "Understood. And if you break something, you fix it. I do not care how long it takes or what it costs you." "Also understood." Frank looked up at him one more time. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently found enough of it. He turned back to his work, and that was the beginning. The first 6 weeks were the hardest thing Kate had done since the year his mother was first diagnosed, and the shape of their life had shifted under them, and he had been 16 years old and had to decide what kind of person he was going to be about it. Frank corrected him 12 times in the first week. 3 of those corrections happened in front of other people. Cade took all of them the same way, without argument, without visible reaction, going home afterward and looking up everything he had gotten wrong, coming back the next morning knowing it. By the 3rd week, the corrections were down to 7. By the 6th week, 4, and they had a different quality. They were no longer about fundamentals. They were about refinement, about the distance between sufficient and right, which Frank apparently considered to be the most important distance in the world, and was unwilling to let anyone in his vicinity treat as negligible. Then came the morning that changed the character of everything between them. It was a Tuesday, 7 weeks into the apprenticeship, before the rest of the crew arrived. Cade had come in early to review the technical drawings for the largest project currently underway, a commissioned custom build for a client whose specifications were precise and whose timeline was fixed. He was going through the frame geometry drawings at the main workbench when he found it. The error was in the load distribution calculations. A transposition in the stress analysis for the rear mounting points that would have been invisible during construction and invisible during initial testing, but would have manifested under sustained load conditions in a way that the frame would not recover from. It was not a catastrophic error in the sense of immediate failure. It was the kind of error that reveals itself slowly and then all at once the worst kind. It was Frank's work. The initials in the corner of the drawing were Frank's. The date was 3 weeks ago before Cade had started on the project. Cade stood at the workbench and looked at the drawing for a long time. He understood his options precisely. He could bring it to Ray directly. Ray would handle it because Ray handled everything, but the handling would be public and Frank would lose something in front of the people he had spent 20 years building credibility with, and that loss would belong to Cade in a way that would outlast whatever credit he might receive for finding the error. He could correct it himself quietly, redraw the affected sections, update the calculations, leave no trace of the original. Nobody would know. The project would proceed correctly. The client would receive what they had commissioned. Everything would be fine. He stood with those two options for the rest of the morning. He did not touch the drawing. When he went home that evening, he sat on the back steps and watched the evening come in over the Kingman rooftops and thought about what Frank Odom had said in the first week, that the moment you trust your memory over your hands is the moment something breaks. He had meant it about physical work, but Cade had filed it in a broader category. He thought about what Ray had said at the table in the building. When you make a mistake, I am going to tell you directly. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of place that did things right. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. He was at the building at 5:40 the next morning, an hour before anyone else. Frank arrived at 6:15. He came through the side door the way he always did and went to the coffee station and poured a cup and turned around and saw Cade standing at the main workbench with the technical drawings laid out in front of him. Frank looked at him. Then he looked at the drawings. He set his coffee down and walked over and looked at what Cade was looking at. He was quiet for a long time. You found this yesterday morning, Frank said, before the crew came in. Yes, Cade said. Frank looked at the drawing. His face was doing something that was difficult to read, the difficulty of a face that has spent decades practicing economy of expression. You could have fixed it yourself, Frank said. Nobody would have known. I know. Frank was quiet again. He looked at the drawing for another long moment. Then he looked at Cade in a way he had not looked at him before in 7 weeks of daily proximity. It was the look of a man recalibrating something. Sit down, Frank said. Cade sat. Frank remained standing. He looked at the drawing one more time. Then he looked at the ceiling briefly, the look of a man consulting something internal. Then he looked at Cade. I have been building for 30 years, Frank said. In that time, I have made 3 errors that mattered. He paused. This is the second one where someone else found it first. He picked up his coffee. The first time he said the man who found it did not come to me. He went to the owner. Frank's voice was even carrying no heat, just the flatness of something remembered accurately. I found out in a meeting, in front of 6 people. He paused. I never forgot it. Not the error and not the way it was handled. Cade said nothing. What you just did, Frank said, is the thing most people do not do. Most people would have fixed it and moved on. Most people would have gone over my head. He looked at Cade steadily. You came to me. It is your work, Cade said. It should be your correction. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, come in early tomorrow. There is something I need to teach you that I have never taught anyone here. He picked up the drawings and went to his desk and began working on the correction. And Cade went to his own workbench and began his day, and neither of them spoke about it again. But something in the air between them had changed in a way that did not require discussion, the way air changes after weather has moved through, and the atmosphere has settled into a new configuration. By the end of that week, Frank was no longer correcting Cade's fundamentals. He was teaching him things that had no name in any manual. 6 weeks after that, Cade finished the panhead. It was a 1958 frame-off rebuild, the most complex thing he had attempted, and Frank had given it to him in pieces with written specifications and a deadline that had no buffer in it. 16 days. Cade had spent the first 4 days doing nothing but studying what he had, mapping the condition of every component, making decisions about what could be restored and what needed to be replaced and what needed to be fabricated from scratch. Frank had not commented on the 4 days of study. He had simply been present at the other end of the building, available and silent. On the morning of the 16th day, with Ray and Roy and Dale and Gus and Frank and 3 members of the crew present, Cade checked the primary chain tension one more time, checked the oil, checked the magneto timing. He checked all of these things a third time, not because he was uncertain, but because Frank had once said, "The moment you trust your memory over your hands is the moment something breaks," and he had put that sentence somewhere in himself where it had become operational. He looked at Ray. Ray nodded once. Cade kicked it over. The engine caught on the second kick, and the sound it produced was not the sound of an engine that had been repaired or restored or made functional. It was the sound of something that had been returned to itself. The note of a machine whose every tolerance is correct, whose every surface has been properly mated, whose decades of accumulated wrong have been patiently removed and replaced with right. It was a sound that meant something that the word running did not cover. Nobody spoke for 5 seconds. Then Frank Odom, from his position against the far wall with his arms crossed, uncrossed his arms. Frank said. Devin Marsh, standing near the back of the group, started clapping. He was the only one for a moment, and then Roy joined him, and then Gus, and then the rest of the crew, until the building held a sound that was not the panhead and not the applause individually, but both of them together, which was its own kind of right. Frank did not clap, but his mouth moved in a way that on a different face would have been called a smile. That evening, Ray called a meeting at the long table. The core people. Roy, Frank, Gus, Dale, and Cade. Donna had asked Cade that morning whether she should come. He had told her he would tell her everything after. Ray set a folder on the table. "We have been talking," he said, "about what comes next. Not for the shop, not for the building, for the idea." He opened the folder. Pages inside, plans, numbers, a proposal with specific language. A training program, he said, formally structured, affiliated with the trade school in Flagstaff, open to applicants who have been turned away from conventional programs, people with records, people aging out of foster care, people who have had enough wrong turns that the standard doors are closed. He looked at Cade. "You asked me in your first week whether what we were building here was only for people who had already proven themselves." He paused. "The answer I gave you was not yet. I think it is time to make it yet." The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something real is being proposed. Not the politeness of people waiting for a speaker to finish, but the active stillness of people listening with more than their ears. "We are calling it the Merit Program," Ray said. "After you." Cade looked at him. "I would rather you did not." "I know you would." Ray's voice was final but not unkind. "We are doing it anyway. The name matters because the story matters. People need to understand where it came from and why." Cade looked at the table. He was 18 years old. He had had his birthday 3 weeks into the apprenticeship quietly without making anything of it. A Tuesday that was the same as every other Tuesday, except that Donna had made his favorite dinner and left it on the stove with a note. The idea of his name on something that would outlast him by decades sat uncomfortably in him in a way he did not have precise language for. But he thought about a Devin Marsh at the back of the room who had arrived at the building 6 weeks ago through the county's youth reintegration program and who had the hands of someone who understood engines even if no one had yet taught them to be precise. He thought about Chris Adler in Tucson, doing well building something with a chance that Gus had extended when nobody else would. He thought about all the people who needed one door to open, just one, and were currently standing in front of walls. "Okay," Cade said. "Okay," Ray said. He looked toward Devin. "But I want Devin in the first cohort. He is not a project. He is exactly who this is for." Ray looked at Devin, who had gone very still near the end of the table. "You interested?" Ray said. Devin looked at Cade, then at Ray. His jaw worked for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I am interested." "Then you are in," Ray said. The program launched 4 months later. 7 participants in the first cohort, each of them carrying a history that conventional institutions had decided made them a liability. They arrived on the first Monday with varying degrees of wariness, some openly skeptical, some trying to conceal it. One young woman who sat in the back and said nothing the entire first day, and then came back the next morning an hour early. Cade ran the orientation. He stood at the front of the room and looked at the 7 of them and said, I am not going to tell you this is easy. It is not. I am not going to tell you it is fair that you are starting here instead of somewhere else. It is not. What I am going to tell you is that this program exists because someone believed that doing the right thing when nobody was watching was worth more than any credential you could put on paper. And if you are here, it is because we believe that about you. He paused. You are going to be corrected constantly. You are going to be frustrated. You are going to make mistakes and fix them and make different mistakes and fix those too. And at some point, he looked at each of them in turn. You are going to make something that is simply right. You will know it when it happens because it does not sound like anything else. The young woman in the back was watching him with the careful measuring look of someone who has been promised things before and learned to wait for the proof. He looked at her directly. Questions. She shook her head. She did not ask a question that day, but she came back every day after. Every single one. Her name was Rhea Caldwell. She was 22 years old, had been in the foster system until 18, had spent 2 years without stable housing after that, and had found her way to the application through a caseworker who had heard about the program from someone who had seen the original clip online and recognized something in it. She had never touched a motorcycle before she walked through the door. By the end of the program's first year, she was the most precise fabricator in the cohort. Frank Odom told her once without softening it or surrounding it with context, "You have the hands for this." She said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means come back tomorrow." She did. 4 months after the first cohort completed, Ray told Cade about the second location. They were at the long table in the evening, just the 2 of them, the building empty and quiet around them. The bikes at various stages along the walls, standing in the stillness of things that are in the process of becoming something. Tucson, Cade said. He looked at the proposed address in the folder. It made geographic sense, Ray said. But there was something else in his voice that was not about geography. It also makes sense because Chris Adler is in Tucson, Cade said. He looked up. Ray held his gaze. Yes, you want me to ask him. I want you to make the call, Ray said. Your relationship, your call. Cade sat back. He thought about Chris, who he had never met, whose story he had heard secondhand from a mutual connection 8 months before the apprenticeship at Gus's shop, whose path had been the thing that made Cade choose the harder job. He had spoken to Chris twice since the clip went viral. Once when Chris had called out of nowhere, his voice rough, saying he had seen everything and that it had made him think about Gus and about what that chance had meant and about what he wanted to do with what it had given him. Cade had listened. He had not said much. He had said, "Call me when you are ready to do something with it." He picked up his phone and called the number. It rang 3 times. Chris said, "You told me to call when I was ready." Cade said, "I'm calling you." A pause. Long enough that Cade would have thought the call had dropped if he had not been able to hear Chris breathing on the other end. "Then what is it?" Tucson, Cade said. "Second location of the program. I want you running it with me." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Cade counted it without meaning to. "I am not qualified," Chris said finally. "That is not what I asked." A pause shorter than the first. "Yeah," Chris said. "Yeah, I am ready." "Good. I will send you the details this weekend." He hung up. He looked at Ray. Ray was watching him with the expression Cade had come to know over the months they had been working together. The attention of a man seeing something that confirmed what he had believed from the beginning and taking quiet satisfaction in the confirmation without needing to announce it. "You know what I wrote on that notepad," Ray said. "The night you went home after the first meeting." Cade said no. Ray reached into the folder. Behind the documents, a single sheet of paper, the kind torn from a basic notepad, the handwriting plain and unhurried. He slid it across the table. Cade picked it up. At the top of the page, 4 words in Ray's handwriting. "Find more like him." He set it down. "Did you?" Cade said. "I started with one." Ray said. "You keep finding the rest." Cade sat with that for a moment in the quiet of the building, with the evening pressing against the high narrow windows and the half-finished machines standing along the walls, and the long wooden table between them, holding the weight of everything that had been decided at it. He thought about Eleanor Voss's porch light. He thought about the bags of groceries left at her door before she was awake. He thought about the cars fixed for free in driveways on Saturday mornings, and the assistance programs declined because someone else needed them more, and the harder job chosen because of the kind of man who ran it in all the mornings before the alley that nobody had seen and nobody had counted, and nobody would ever know the full shape of except him. He thought about the 31 seconds of shaky vertical phone footage that had found its way to 140,000 people overnight, and then kept going. And he thought about what those people had been hungry for when they shared it, what they were looking for in it, what it had given them that they had apparently needed badly enough to send it to someone else, the proof that it existed. Not the heroism, not the tire iron or the confrontation or the outcome, the thing underneath all of that. The thing that had been in him since before he knew it was there, that expressed itself in grocery bags and free oil changes and turned down charity and the choice to work for a man who had once decided a person was worth the trouble. The 6 seconds were not the source of any of it. The 6 seconds were just the moment it became visible. The heroes are not made in 6 seconds. They are revealed in 6 seconds. They are made in every ordinary moment before that, in every choice made in the dark, in every act of simple decency performed. Not because anyone is watching, but because some people. The rare ones, the ones worth building programs around and naming things after, and driving 300 motorcycles across a city for simply cannot do anything else. It is not a decision they make. It is what they are when nobody is counting. Cade Merritt was one of them. He always had been. The camera just finally caught up.